So when it comes to applying for funding grants, it is important to demonstrate that public involvement is integrated in your research. Some of you may have seen or heard about the NIHR application process. If you download an application form, you will notice that the Stage 1 application form does not have a specific question or dedicated section about public involvement. The expectation is that public involvement has already been done prior to submission of Stage 1, and it's key that you still refer to public involvement throughout the application form, such as the research plan and the plain English summary. Now, when you get through to Stage 2, the application will have a dedicated section, and you can summarise how members of the public have already been involved in the development of the grant application and how you plan to involve people throughout the duration of the study if you receive funding. It's important to know, however, that not all studies will require public involvement. If this is the case for your study, then you need to explain in this section why public is not relevant to your study, as this needs to be justified. So what do reviewers look for then? These are some of the generic points that people on the panel are looking for. The key things include having a clear, plain English summary, free from jargon, which can be understood by people who are not experts in the research area. They want to see how public involvement has informed the development of the grant application. This could be, for instance, in prioritising the research topic, or perhaps advising on the study design and plain English summary. They want to see a clear plan for involving members of the public throughout the research project. The other thing to mention is the type and appropriateness of the people providing the public involvement input. This is really important as the reviewers want to see that you have a good understanding of equality, diversity and inclusion, so including people from a variety of backgrounds. They also want to be sure that who you are involving is representative of your target population. For instance, if your research is focusing on a disease that is more common in a specific community, then they will want to see that you have the right people advising you on the project as part of the public involvement. Another really important thing to mention is you need to show an awareness of any challenges to doing public involvement and possible solutions. So this can include things like training and support. For instance, as you will all know at the moment, a lot of communication is being done online and virtually. If you plan to do public involvement using video conferencing software, it's important that you consider what support training those people providing public involvement may need so that they feel comfortable providing digital engagement. This does not need to be formal training, it could be providing one-to-one support or guidance, as there is plenty of information online to support people to engage in a digital environment. The reviewers will want to see that you have considered their support needs, so it is important to incorporate this in your application. They will also look to see whether the amount of involvement seems appropriate. For example, you want to avoid overburdening people. You also want to provide fair and appropriate costs for the public involvement.
So how do we find people to be public contributors in our research? It might be about using existing networks, or it could be about creating new connections. Who do you know that might be able to help you access the relevant people? And there are pros and cons to different approaches. For example, clinical contacts, great because they're direct access to local people with experience of a specific condition or intervention. However, a downside might be that some patients may feel pressure to say yes when someone directly involved in their care is approaching them. It's important to approach people in an ethically conscious way. It might be existing public involvement groups and networks, such as the RDS Yorkshire and Humber Public Involvement Searchable Database. They're really helpful because there might be mechanisms in place to help support people during their involvement. But there isn't a network or group existing for every disease or topic area. So it's about seeing what's out there. There could be through charities or support groups. Charity representatives may have some existing knowledge and experience of research in a particular area. But sometimes if people are already immersed in research culture, it may be challenging for them to really put themselves in the position of study participants. Or it could be community organisations such as schools or faith groups. An advantage here is community organisations are likely to have links to a broad range of people, not just people already interested in research. But sometimes research might not be a priority for these organisations, and they may have conflicting other priorities. It could be advertising opportunities to the general public through posters, newspaper, radio, social media, for example. And you may find people through these means that you would not otherwise think to get involved in research. But it can take quite a lot of work to build up a following on social media. and you might not get the reach you need unless posts are shared from accounts that already have that relevant audience. So how can you involve people? It might be through group discussions, or it could be one-to-one discussions, and there are pros and cons to both. People might feel more comfortable and honest in a one-to-one discussion, but then also conversations in a group can spark ideas, and people might actually feel more comfortable surrounded by their peers. And that's why it's important to speak to contributors about their thoughts on the method of engagement, as it might not be the same for everyone. Can you be flexible in your approach? A mix of methods might be the best way forward. You might do a survey, and an advantage here is that it involves a higher number of people with a potentially broader range of perspectives. But you're not going to get quite the same level of depth and understanding as you would talking directly to a small group. Or you might choose to use a more innovative method, such as an interactive workshop, which includes creative exercises. And there are different facilitation techniques that could be used here. You could include an element of theatre, of arts or crafts, poetry. I've attended a public workshop where there was an illustrator present who listened to the discussions around the room and drew them in illustrations, and these were placed around the room for everyone to see as a kind of visual log of what was being discussed. An example I've taken here was the child cosmos sculpture, and this was used visual art techniques to facilitate public engagement with Better Start Bradford around health and nutrition. I've taken this from my colleague Delia Muir's blog, and she said the aim was to improve young children's health, social and emotional well-being, communication and diet. So the community engagement was central to the programme. They used arts activities as a starting point for conversations about health. She said she was particularly struck about how well this worked with some of the very young children involved. The tactile nature of the activities seemed to engage them really well, and also that creating something visual together really helped foster a sense of achievement.
So I'm going to briefly talk about how the Research Design Service can support you. There are research design services across the UK. Each research design service has a variety of advisors that can help support you with developing project proposals and can advise on different aspects of research. So on this slide, you can see who the contacts are in the Yorkshire and Humber region for providing advice on public involvement. We can provide advice on how to promote and facilitate public involvement activities, including how to find and approach people and comment on appropriate methods of input to use. We also have a newsletter and hold workshops and talks throughout the year on different topics, such as developing a high quality funding application, public involvement and applying for an NIHR training fellowship. You can find more information about how we can support you on our website, and you can request advice by completing a short form online. I would also suggest signing up to our mailing list if you would like to hear about any of our upcoming events. I just want to tell you about the Research Design Service Public Involvement Fund. So it can be challenging to involve members of the public when developing research ideas if you do not have money to involve them. Our Public Involvement Fund allows researchers to apply for funding of up to £500 to support them to involve members of the public in developing their research ideas and grant application. This can be to provide public involvement for a specific project or to establish a new public involvement research advisory group or panel. There are 3 calls a year, and the latest one was in January, and the next deadline will be at the end of May. So how can you get a Public Involvement Fund award? There is a 3-page application form, and you must complete this in order to apply for the fund. So what do we look for in the applications? We ask applicants to write a plain English summary of a maximum of 750 words. We want to see a good quality plain English summary that clearly outlines the research plan and is free from jargon so can be understood by people who are not experts in the research area. There is guidance out there to support you to write a good plain English summary, and I've provided a link to this at the end of this presentation. For a project-specific application, we would expect to see a plain English summary that includes a background to the research, aims, design and methods used, public involvement and dissemination. For an application to establish a new public involvement panel, we would expect to see details on the remit of the panel, why it's needed, any planned grant applications which the group will contribute to, and an outline of any academic or clinical links that may be established. We want to see well thought out plans of how members of the public will be actively involved in the development of the grant application. For example, who you plan to involve, how you intend to approach people, what input do you want to achieve, how activities will be facilitated, how members of the public will be supported, and any relevant experience or expertise the research team will bring to the proposed public involvement activities. For applications to establish a new panel, we would also like to see information on how the applicant's organisation intends to sustain the group once the Research Design Service Public Involvement Fund Award has been used, and any ideas for future training and support needs. We also want to see a clear description of how members of the public will be involved if the grant application is successful. For applications of establishing a new panel, we would like to see a clear description of the role the panel will have in the research team or organisation. We want to see that the applicant has thought about quality, diversity and inclusion when describing who they plan to involve, how they plan to involve them, and considering their training and support needs. Throughout the application, we also want to see evidence that the applicant has considered the different UK standards. The Research Design Service is keen to evaluate the experiences of the public who take part in involvement activities which we fund. So we also expect to see a clear plan of how the applicant would evaluate the public involvement work that the Public Involvement Fund Award would support. We also ask applicants to state the funding schemes that they plan to apply for, and we also look to see that the applicant has provided a clear breakdown of the costs and how the Public Involvement Award would be spent. Because the Public Involvement Fund Award is open to people working in various organisations, we do not specify the exact amount which applicants should reimburse the public for their time or expenses. We advise applicants to liaise with their finance department for advice on costing. This figure shows the award process. When an application is submitted, I will review it to ensure that it is within remit. If it is within remit, then I will distribute the application to funding panel members to review. The panel members include Research Design Service staff and members of the Public Involvement Forum, which is a group of members of the public and health and social care professionals from across the region who all have an interest in public involvement in research. At least one lay member of the forum will review each application. We then have a meeting to discuss our review comments in order to reach a final decision. We will then send out an outcome letter with the feedback. We may recommend funding. We may recommend funding subject to changes and clarifications, such as improving the plain English summary or clarifying costs, or we may choose not to recommend funding and suggest resubmitting at the next call. So what happens if you miss the deadline? In exceptional circumstances, we may accept applications between calls. For example, when a commission call has a tight deadline, these fast-track applications will be reviewed by myself and one member of our Public Involvement Forum. If you do ever want to be considered for a fast-track application, then please contact me to discuss this further. Researchers who are successful at receiving a Public Involvement Fund Award are asked to complete a short report which covers how the award was used. There are examples of reports from previously successful applicants available on our website. You can also find out more about the Public Involvement Fund on our website as well. Here are a list of resources that you may find useful, including how to write a good plain English summary, some background information about public involvement, and how the Research Design Service supports researchers. We also have a Public Involvement Handbook, which provides a useful introduction to public involvement. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you have found this talk interesting and useful. And if you have any questions, you can always email one of the RDS staff, including myself.